History is a set of lies agreed upon. But the fear he struck into the hearts of kings was very real. They mocked him as the little corporal. They drew cartoons of his height to hide their own terror. But while Europe laughed at his stature, he was busy dismantling their empires. With a map, a compass, and a mind that moved faster than any cavalry charge. Napoleon Bonaparte didn't just fight wars, he rewrote the rules of human conflict. How did a man from a tiny island with a fractured army and a world of enemies manage to bring an entire continent to its knees? Today, we are diving deep into the 5 insane strategies that turned a supposed short man into the greatest shadow ever cast over Europe. Before we march into the smoke of the battlefield, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. Join our community of history explorers so you never miss a deep dive into the moments that shaped our world. Now, let's go back to the dawn of the 19th century, where one man's genius was about to set the world on fire.
Europe at the end of the 18th century was a rigid stage, ruled by kings who governed by birthright and ancient traditions that had stood for centuries. War at that time was an aristocrat's game, ordered, slow, and highly predictable. However, amidst the chaos of the French Revolution, a young man emerged from a remote island called Corsica. He had no prestigious name, no wealth, and he was often mocked for his coarse accent and a physical stature that was deemed less than ideal for a high-ranking officer. The world knew him as Napoleon Bonaparte. The British, through sharp caricatures, nicknamed him Little Boney. They tried to diminish his figure into a mere physical joke. However, the reality was far more terrifying for them. This man they laughed at was a genius capable of seeing the battlefield as if it were a transparent chessboard. Where other generals saw obstacles, Napoleon saw opportunities. Where other kings saw tradition, Napoleon saw systemic weaknesses ready to be shattered. This is the story of how one man, with physical limitations and limited resources, managed to turn the tide against giant coalitions consisting of Britain, Russia, Austria, and Prussia. This is a deep analysis of 5 insane strategies that not only won battles, but also redefined the art of warfare forever. The revolution of the corps system. Dividing to conquer, imagine a massive army of 100,000 men moving together. In the 18th century, this was a logistical disaster. A force this size could only move as fast as the slowest soldier in the rear. If they hit a narrow road, they would be jammed for hours. This was the weak point Napoleon identified. Napoleon introduced the corps d'armée system. He broke his Grand Armée, the Grand Armée, into several smaller units called corps. Each corps was not just a collection of soldiers, they were miniature, complete armies. Within a single corps, there was infantry for close combat, cavalry for reconnaissance and fast strikes, and artillery for fire support. Each corps was led by a marshal who had full authority to make decisions on the ground without waiting for direct orders from Napoleon. This strategy created an optical illusion for the enemy. When enemy spies saw a single French corps, they assumed it was Napoleon's entire army. They would immediately deploy their full strength to attack that single unit. However, Napoleon used the bottleneck principle. While the attacked corps held its ground with all its might, other French corps scattered in the surrounding area within a single day's march would immediately close in. In an instant, the enemy, thinking they were trapping a sheep, realized they had stepped into a wolf's den, surrounded from all directions. This corps system provided a level of flexibility never before seen in military history. Napoleon could shift positions with a speed that was impossible for the coalition forces, who were still stuck in the rigid formations of the Middle Ages. Maneuver Derrière, the art of mental destruction for Napoleon. A battle was not won simply by killing the enemy, but by breaking their will to fight. His most beloved strategy was the maneuver Derrière, or the strike from the rear. Traditionally, 2 armies would face each other linearly, trading fire until one retreated. Napoleon considered this foolish and a waste of lives. He preferred to perform military magic tricks. He would send a small portion of his troops to conduct a false attack loud and convincing at the enemy's front line. While the enemy general's attention was fixed on that distraction, Napoleon would personally lead his main force on a secret, grueling journey. They would take long detours, often through terrain deemed impossible, such as dense swamps or the snow-capped Alps, only to emerge at the enemy's most vulnerable point. Their supply lines and communication routes. When the enemy soldiers looked back and saw the French tricolor flag flying over their path home, mass panic would ensue. Napoleon knew that a soldier fights bravely if he knows there is a way back. But once that path is closed, courage turns to terror. In many cases such as the Italian campaign or the Battle of Ulm, thousands of enemy soldiers surrendered without firing a single shot because they felt strategically defeated. Napoleon won wars with his soldiers' legs, not just their rifles. Artillery concentration. The logic of the cannon officer. Napoleon began his career not as an infantry commander, but as an artillery officer. He understood the mathematics behind projectile trajectories and the psychological impact of explosions. To him, cannons were not just support tools, they were the primary instruments of victory. Before the Napoleonic era, cannons were usually spread out along the battle line to strengthen defenses. Napoleon did the exact opposite. He created what was known as the Grand Battery. He would pull all the cannons from every unit and concentrate them into a single, narrow, focal point. This strategy targeted the critical point. Napoleon would observe the enemy's defensive line with his telescope, searching for a single weakness be at a small hill, a building, or the junction between two enemy units. Once that point was found, he would order hundreds of cannons to fire at the same spot continuously. This rain of cannonballs would create a gaping hole in the enemy formation. The opposing soldiers were not just physically destroyed, they were mentally shattered seeing their comrades vanish in an instant. Once the defense was broken, Napoleon would release his heavy cavalry, the armored cuirassiers, charge through that gap. This was military surgery. Destroy one part, and the entire body of the enemy army becomes logistical speed. Living off the land, one reason the coalition armies were so slow was that they carried mobile cities behind them, thousands of food wagons, chefs, servants, and even luxury beds for the nobles. This meant an army could only move about 10 to 15 kilometers a day. Napoleon destroyed all that luxury. He established the principle that war must support war. The French army did not carry food reserves for months. Instead, they carried minimal cooking equipment and moved with lightning speed. Napoleon's soldiers were ordered to forage for food in the villages they passed through. While this method was often harsh for the local population, the military effect was extraordinary. Napoleon's troops could cover 30 to 40 kilometers a day. In the military world, speed is power. Napoleon was often able to arrive at the battlefield before the enemy had even finished pitching their tents. This speed allowed Napoleon to apply the strategy of beating them in detail. If he faced two enemy armies trying to link up, Napoleon would move rapidly between them, destroying the first army in the morning, then turning back to destroy the second in the afternoon before they even realized what had happened. To the enemy, Napoleon seemed to possess the ability to be in two places at once. Charismatic leadership and meritocracy, Napoleon's final strategy was the one most difficult for European kings to replicate. He loved his soldiers, and his soldiers worshipped him. In the Austrian or Russian armies, a common soldier was a disposable tool, and officers were chosen based on family name. In Napoleon's army, a peasant's son could become a marshal if he showed extraordinary courage. Napoleon created the Légion d'honneur, an award given based on merit, not caste. He was often seen walking in the middle of the night, sharing his bread rations with exhausted soldiers, or pinching a young soldier's ear as a sign of affection, legendary Napoleonic gesture. These soldiers called themselves les grognards, or the grumblers, because even though they complained about the long, exhausting marches, they would do anything for the emperor. Napoleon understood mass psychology. He knew that a man would not die for money, but he would willingly die for a medal and recognition from a leader he respected. The world's greatest fear of Napoleon was not his weapons, but his ability to awaken a revolutionary spirit in the hearts of common people. The kings of Europe feared that if their soldiers saw how fair Napoleon's system was, they would drop their weapons and join this short man to topple the thrones of their own kings. Conclusion. Echoes from St. Helena in the end, overwhelming numbers, and the brutal Russian winter managed to halt the emperor's progress. However, his defeat at Waterloo did not erase the fact that he had changed the face of the globe. His strategies were not just about winning wars. They were about efficiency, speed, and the recognition of human ability over the privilege of birth. The world might have called him short as an insult, but history records that height is not a measure of a person's influence. Napoleon Bonaparte stands as a giant in the annals of history. Every time we look at a modern legal system, every time we see an efficient military structure, and every time we speak of meritocracy, the shadow of the emperor is there, smiling. For, in the end, Napoleon was not just a general. He was a storm that swept away the old world order, leaving behind the foundations for the modern world we live in today. The world feared him not because of what he did to their bodies, but because of what he did to their minds. He proved that nothing is impossible for those who dare to think insanely.